So the teaser trailer for Amazon's The Lord of the Rings of Power series has pretty much divided the internet, I'd say. On the one side, you've got people that absolutely love and adore the trailer. On the other side, you've got the people that absolutely loathe the trailer. And then you've just got the spectrum in between of the people that are indifferent towards it, that like it but aren't super hyped, or are veering towards the negative side where they're just like, I don't like it, this isn't my Lord of the Rings, I hate it. I personally find myself in the middle, veering more towards slightly negative, just because the teaser to me didn't really do anything. It didn't excite me, it didn't thrill me. It pretty much just made me go, okay, you spent $500 million on what? I mean, don't get me wrong, for a TV budget, it looks good. But, I mean, this costs more than Game of Thrones Season 8, and although we don't talk about the cinematography in The Long Night, Game of Thrones Season 8 looked great. This, however, looked fine, but it didn't really look like The Lord of the Rings to me. We get this shot of what everyone is saying is Numenor, and to me, I was like, oh, the color grading's off. Again, it has the Amazon Wheel of Time color grading where all the highlights look overblown, and it doesn't resemble the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings cinematography, which is what they want to channel. Again, the weird identity of the show is that it wants to be its own thing, but it also wants to go, hey look, you love the Lord of the Rings, remember the Lord of the Rings? I've just done a slight recolor grade here, just for the fun of it. And to me, what I've done looks more like Lord of the Rings, because when you watch the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings films, the whites in those movies never truly look white. They are always slightly warm in the color tones. They're more a sort of ivory. They have a slight yellow tinge to the white. Nothing is ever purely white. And you look at the color grading in the teaser trailer for the shots of Numenor, for example, and it's very clearly white, and you're like, that doesn't compute, that's not how Lord of the Rings looked. So there is that for me. There are moments where I'm like, the actual filmmaking doesn't look and resemble Lord of the Rings. And then there's just the whole aesthetic of it that looks kind of clean because they shot it digitally, and it just doesn't compute. And then there's the CGI of Galadriel climbing up the ice mountain thing. She does that weird CGI jump, and that kind of bugged me. I was like, you have all this money, and you couldn't afford to get the actress playing Galadriel and have her, you know, literally jump on like a practical wall and do that. You couldn't do that practically. I mean, Game of Thrones had a whole episode where Jon Snow and Ygritte and the wildlings were climbing up the wall made of ice. Just do what they did in that. That looked great. I don't see why they had to resort to a CGI double and then sort of deep fake the actor's face onto the model. It looks weird and bad, and it's like, why did you do that? That didn't make any sense. And then most of the other new stuff to me looked fine, but it didn't really make me go, this is Lord of the Rings. There were probably 2 shots that made me go, yeah, this is Lord of the Rings. The shot of this elf fighting off all these orcs, and the shot of this dwarf who I believe is Durin. Those were the shots to me that made me go, oh yeah, this is the Lord of the Rings. This is what I remember Lord of the Rings to be like. Other things in the trailer just didn't wow me, or just made me go, okay, I don't know what the context of this is, so why should I care? And then there are the characters they've shown us that we do know, in terms of Elrond and Galadriel. Elrond with short hair just looks weird to me. He's played by the actor who played young Ned Stark in Game of Thrones, and my brain just went, hold on, he's in the wrong fantasy franchise. What is he doing here? He doesn't resemble Hugo Weaving, and that just felt off to me because, again, it's the paradox of the show. It wants to be its own separate thing, but it also wants you to go, hey look, remember Lord of the Rings? Ah! And then when it comes to Galadriel, it's just weird seeing her actually in action doing stuff, because from what I can remember, bear in mind, when it comes to The Lord of the Rings, I've read the original trilogy twice. Actually, technically, on my first time around, I didn't actually finish Return of the King. I got to the bit where Gollum fell into Mount Doom, the ring was destroyed, and because I was like 13 at the time, I closed the book, because Lord of the Rings is a long and hard and laborious read. I closed it there, I was done, I tapped out, I was like, Tolkien, I love the Lord of the Rings movies, I love the story of the Lord of the Rings, but yeah, these books are hard to read. I love The Hobbit, The Hobbit's a great read, I've read The Hobbit about 3 or 4 times, it's a great book, but Lord of the Rings for me is just long and arduous, it's a really tough read. I don't know, maybe my brain isn't big enough for that. But in terms of the Galadriel from the Lord of the Rings books and films, to me, there was a disconnect seeing her in this battle armor. I was like, Galadriel never seemed like the character that would do such a thing, because she was incredibly powerful. She would also show restraint and seem like a person that would sit on the sides and would strategically think about things before engaging in battle. And of course she has that weird Super Saiyan mode where she's like, ah,
in place of a Dark Lord, you would have a queen!
And it's like, okay, so she's very powerful, but she sits on the side because she'd rather use her mind than her actual power. And maybe in the Silmarillion, which I haven't read, Galadriel is mentioned to be a badass warrior. Or maybe in the appendices that I've read a bit of, but when I read the appendices, I ended up kind of just skimming to the stuff that, like, took place around about the Hobbit. Like, I didn't really go into the Second Age and the First Age because I didn't care. Like, the most about the Second Age I recall reading was the stuff that happened at the end of the Second Age when Isildur went and marched on Mount Doom with the elves. But other than that, I haven't read the appendices fully. Like, I kind of just focused on stuff that took place around about the time of Lord of the Rings. Like, you know, how Pippin named his son Faramir and all that. But I didn't fully analyze and read it like it was a historical text that I needed to know about. So maybe Galadriel was a warrior, but to me, in my brain, seeing her in this battle armor, trying to be all strong and tough, it didn't correlate in my brain. But again, maybe in the show it makes sense as to why she is a warrior. Maybe it's just a story about how she realizes that fighting in wars isn't really the best thing for her, and how she decides to retire from the war campaign side of it and decides to become more of a politician and a thinker. And so I can't judge too hastily because this is just a piece of marketing. This isn't the full story. I don't know what Galadriel is doing, and so I can't really, you know, comment on it. And that's the thing about the teaser, there's nothing I can really say apart from, okay, they showed us stuff, and that stuff didn't really make me feel anything. I was just like, okay, they just showed us stuff, but why do I care? And then of course you've got the real hot red button topic of the whole trailer, and that is the diversity of the cast. Black elves, black dwarves, oh no, what happened to my Middle-earth? So regarding this topic of the diversity in the show and whether it should or should not be, this is the opportunity I'm taking to open up a dialogue. I'm curious because I have watched a bunch of different reactions to the trailer. Critical Drinker's video on it is interesting, same with the Night's Watch guys. Their take on the whole idea of the diversity casting and why they don't like it for the Lord of the Rings is interesting. They raise up this point that Tolkien wanted to create a mythology about England. He wanted to make it a very Anglo-Saxon mythology for English people, and so therefore the characters in the story would be predominantly white. And then other points were raised, such as if you were going to make a Black Panther film and you decided to make T'Challa white and the Wakandans white, there would be a bit of a problem, and that's what they're doing in terms of the race bending of the dwarves and elves. And that to me is interesting. And then of course the whole discussion becomes even more interesting when you try to factor into the account of what would Tolkien want. Would this fit his vision? Is this what he wanted for Middle-earth? And so as for myself, as a writer, as a director, as a filmmaker, as a, you know, storyteller, I have a certain way I view my stories, how I write my stories. And so if I saw somebody take what I had written and change it and not make it the same thing that I wanted it to be, I would be against such a thing. I'd be like, why are you changing the meaning of my story? Don't do that. Like, what are you doing? But the thing is, Tolkien and his son Christopher aren't alive anymore. They're not with us. And from what I understand, the Tolkien estate is involved in the show, or they're not involved in the show. I'm not 100% sure, but there isn't an active Tolkien voice going, no, you shouldn't do this, or yes, you should do this. Amazon has the liberty to do sort of whatever they want. Now, personally, the diversity in the casting doesn't affect me. There are a couple of things that I do find weird, like I do think the black elf with the really short hair looks off to me. And that's predominantly because when I think of an elf, I think of elves with longer hair. So if that elf actor to me had longer hair, like maybe dreads or whatever, like, you know, tied up and like really long shoulder length dreads, it would look pretty cool. I would be like, ah, that looks much better. But he's got really short hair and it just looks off to me. And the Queen of the Dwarves as well doesn't look very dwarvish to me. Like, obviously, I'm guessing in context of the show, she's been scaled down. But she doesn't scream Dwarf Queen to me because, again, it's like what they sort of said in Return of the King. Gimli's like, oh yeah, the dwarf women are all hairy. It's the dwarves who are swimming with filthy little hairy women. And the whole conversation he has with Eowyn in Two Towers, they're talking about how dwarf women were bearded. And so, seeing the dwarf queen in this show not being bearded, I was like, that's off. Or is it? I don't know. And look, I'm an ethnic individual, like, Look at my skin, I'm not white. Ah, meddling, get it off, get it off! And look, I myself am an ethnic person. I'm half Algerian, I'm quarter Indian, quarter Guyanese, but I've been raised British. I was born and raised in Britain, I am British. I'm also a Muslim, so like, I don't mind the diversity in the show. But I can also see why people would have a problem with it if it's the idea of Tolkien was trying to create a mythology and it would go against his original wishes. But as an ethnic person who is not only on the road to become a filmmaker, but also a potential actor, me as an actor, if I was offered the opportunity to be in a Lord of the Rings thing, like, hell yeah, I'd jump at the role, I'd leap at it, I'd eat it up, I'd want to be in something like this. This is awesome. I love the Lord of the Rings, and if I could play, you know, somebody from Gondor or from Rohan, I would jump at the chance. I would love to do that. I'd love to be involved. Lord of the Rings is a franchise I love and adore, and the whole message of the Lord of the Rings is all about setting aside our differences and uniting to face against an evil. Like, I would love to be in such a project as this. Another little sub-point I want to bring up is the idea of, is diversity in film and TV and entertainment as a whole needed? And in addition to that, do I need to see a person of my ethnicity on screen to relate to them? And jumping straight off that point, no. I don't need the person on screen to look exactly like me, be of the same ethnicity of me. But, on the other hand, I do see the value of having a person of a similar ethnicity to me or to other people being represented on screen. In a way, yes, diversity is needed, but for me, it's not the be-all and end-all of entertainment. Like, most of my favourite fictional characters are white people. I am not white. But I love characters like Jon Snow. I love characters like Harry Potter. I love characters like Batman and Spider-Man, specifically Peter Parker. Like, Peter Parker is a white dude, but I can relate to his struggles because he goes through similar struggles that I do. And whilst I see the importance of other ethnicities being represented as Spider-Man, for example, Miles Morales and Miguel O'Hara, I don't need those characters to specifically exist for me to enjoy Spider-Man because for me, Peter Parker is enough. I can relate to the struggles of Peter Parker, his day-to-day, his money problems, his girl problems. I can relate to all that. But I also can see the power of relating to the other ethnic versions of Spider-Man, like Miguel O'Hara and Miles Morales in particular. I mean, the amount of pride I see from African Americans and black people when they see Miles Morales on screen and they relate to him, that's great to see. I love that kind of stuff. And I mean, I myself feel that when I watch the original Aladdin. Like, I love Aladdin. My whole life I've been told I look like Aladdin. And yeah, it's absolutely wonderful to see a character that looks like me on the big screen. But then again, other times where it feels really wrong to have a white person in the role is, say, for example, when it's like the Prince of Persia. Like, yes, the casting of Jake Gyllenhaal as the Prince of Persia is not great. He is not Persian at all, and it is really wrong. But he also just looks really good on screen. But this is not me excusing the casting of Prince of Persia because, I mean, it was awful. Like, there are straight up just white dudes that are pretending to be Persian, and it's like, you are not Persian. Like, in no way, shape, or form. You just look like you came out from the set of The Lord of the Rings and was put in the Prince of Persia. Like, what? I mean, Liam Neeson as Ra's al Ghul was absolutely fantastic. But the man is not Arabian. Ra's al Ghul is an Arabian character. And, like, the film does a weird thing where they try and make Ra's al Ghul, the fake one, you know, in Batman Begins. The fake Ra's al Ghul is played by Ken Watanabe. They made him Japanese. And you're kind of just sitting there just like, why did you do that? Ra's al Ghul is an Arabian man since... in what way, shape, or form does the name Ra's al Ghul correlate to a Japanese man? That doesn't make any sense. And whilst it is morally questionable that they whitewash these characters, the performances given by these actors were incredible and they fit their roles for the film. I mean, Liam Neeson is perfect as Ra's al Ghul. I loved him in Batman Begins. He fits the character so well and the character comes alive because of his performance. And that to me is the most fascinating part when talking about diversity and the power of diversity, because there are times where diversity and specific ethnicities are required for storytelling. And there are other times where it isn't important because it doesn't really matter so long as the storytelling and the character work is good. I just think the whole topic itself is interesting because, of course, if you want to create a more diverse fantasy world, like, write your own fantasy thing. I mean, when it comes to me writing my own fantasy, there are certain characters I do envision as a certain ethnicity. But at the end of the day, when it comes to other characters in the story, I don't specify their race. Just in my brain, I go, this is how I want them to look. But on paper, I don't officially describe it all the time. Honestly, this whole topic for me is just fascinating because it's just opening up a much wider discussion of authorship and should we respect the authorial intent, or should we be more inclusive and more diverse. But then also, if we want to do that, should we be doing it with an established property like The Lord of the Rings, or should we be making our own things? Because, I mean, I'm all for making our own new original ideas and trying to get them out to much larger audiences to help spread diversity in fantasy and science fiction and just in entertainment as a whole. But also, like I said, if you offered me something like The Lord of the Rings, hell yeah, I, as an aspiring actor, would be jumping at a chance to be in something like this. But to wrap things up, overall, I thought the trailer for Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power was underwhelming because it didn't really show me anything other than, oh, look at our budget and spectacle, which even then didn't impress me because some of it looked really off. As for now, all I can say is that the trailer didn't do anything for me, so I just have to wait and see. We didn't really get any sense of the quality of the writing or the storytelling, so I can't really judge it for that. But what did you guys think of the Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power teaser trailer? Let me know in the comments down below. And please, just feel free to talk about the things that I've discussed in this video, the idea of diversity and inclusion, and the idea of respecting authorship. I really want to hear your thoughts on all that, so put that in the comment section as well. Like, subscribe, follow me on social media, all that good stuff. And until we meet again, see you guys next time.